Hi, welcome to another edition of 1 in 15. And as ever, I'll get my guests to introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Amy. I'm a dramatherapist. I trade under the name Play It Through. I work with lots of different client groups.
Brilliant. It's so great to have you, Amy. And I'm really excited about what you're going to be introducing us to help us to think about. As you know, this series, we're thinking about things that are really dominating our thinking at the moment. Tell me one thing that's just kind of there, you can't quite get rid of it, really dominating your thinking.
I think for me, there's so much that could come out, but it's been something around isolation and connection,
Sure.
both internally with ourselves and externally with relationships around us.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, wow, that's a huge issue.
It's
Perfect.
massive
Yeah,
in 15
massive.
minutes.
So obviously the reflection is something to do with it. The global pandemic has had a massive impact on how we do those things, how we relate to other people in particular, and we've had to move from physical space for most of our meetings to electronic space. But yeah, I think you're right. So how we interrelate with ourselves, certainly with our close family members. What do you think are some of the biggest impacts on that at the moment?
So there's physical separation, lack of touch, lack of real eye contact. These are all really huge things. So, from a psychology point of view, we attune to people by making eye contact, and you can't actually do it on Zoom. Because I can look at you now, and I'm not actually looking at you. To look at you, I have to look at the camera,
Sure.
and then to look at the camera, I'm not looking. So it's not. We're not quite there. We're almost there. Um, and also the whole like taking in people's body language, like we get this much of somebody,
Sure.
and that's all. And it's just much harder to really feel connected. Um, and we regulate through these things. So making eye contact with someone, a hand on a shoulder, holding hands, these are ways that our nervous system actually calms down.
Yeah.
And if we're in a state of hyper arousal, because there's lots of scary things going on, like a global pandemic, for example, having that physical contact would be one of the ways that we could cope. And not only have we had the global pandemic, but we've also had a loss of these forms of connection.
Yeah.
So it's been twofold, really. It's been the danger and the loss of the things that help us to cope.
Yeah. And that's really interesting because as you're saying that, I'm thinking of my own situation in a house of six people where it feels like almost actually the opposite problem is happening, where it feels like we're in close proximity to each other much more of the time than we would be. And so I totally agree with what you're saying, but I'm really conscious of that. Actually, for me, one of the pressures has been trying to find, I guess that's the time with myself, the connection with myself bit, where I'm apart from other people.
Absolutely. And everyone's got different circumstances. Yeah, it's an interesting one to reflect on. I've spoken to a lot of people actually where even in a very busy household, they say, but we don't see each other. Everybody just stays in their own room and nobody comes out. And so even in a busy household, sometimes you're missing that. But it sounds really healthy actually to have that buzz going on. But I can also totally see the lack of space for self. I've had some of that, having to work from home as a therapist. It's really important that I've got client confidentiality, and that is difficult to manage in a household where I've got other people living around
Of
me, and I'm
course.
having to sort of protect that. Um, but yeah, it's both. It's can I connect and can I get space? And do you know sometimes the only space you can get is to go and sit in the car
Yeah.
or on the doorstep or wherever it is that's I just have to get out for a minute.
Yeah, and I find that again, I find that really interesting because one of the things I've been reflecting on amongst a lot of criteria over the pandemic is how some of those inequalities of experience are really showing. So the
Mhm.
story I've been saying is, I'm deeply jealous of my friends who live right on the edge of the country and can go for long walks because I
Yeah.
can't do that because I live in East London. Um, but I'm also acutely aware of friends who, maybe there's three of them in a 13-story flat with no shared garden, and at least we have a small garden that we can run out of. So with all that kind of stuff going on, what are some of your tips or suggestions for how we start to mitigate this reality?
Um, I think it's finding quality attachments.
Yep.
So, is there a way that we can bring more quality to the attachments and experiences and connections that we're having. So if that is a busy household, is that finding one member and saying, I want to have a meaningful connection with you right now?
Sure.
And equally, if you are on your own, is that saying, okay, well, how can I meaningfully connect?
Yeah.
Can I talk to my neighbor over a garden fence? Can I phone someone? Can I Zoom? What's the best way of me achieving this? And it's trying to find that, and also being really self-aware to know when you don't need that.
Yeah.
And even someone living on their own, they might still need space. Like, they don't need people Zooming them all the time.
Sure.
Because Zoom fatigue's a real thing.
Yeah.
And we can't just live our lives going, yes, let's stare at this screen. So it's finding the balance, whatever the circumstance, and it will be different, and different people will need to prioritize different things in that.
Yeah. And I like that so that kind of impetus on us to be as self-aware as we are able, with the caveat of all the internal and external pressures that we're dealing with, but to notice, because when I still had a job, we had like those informal Zoom coffee break things, and I found them exhausting, because it wasn't, like, planned informality is never informal anyway, and that kind of, and that thing that, that Zoom fatigue thing where, you mentioned the eye contact, but I was also really aware that when the camera's on, you're at the front of stage the whole time. Even if you're not the one talking, you can see a little picture of yourself. Even if you remove that little picture of yourself, you're still really conscious that you can't relax in the same way that you maybe could in a meeting in the real world. And that kind of pressure to perform and to be on at your best the whole time is just exhausting.
As a drama therapist, I work a lot with parts inside us and different roles that we play and different ways that we express. And I think absolutely there's that showman that we all have somehow that is having to do a lot. And whether you've got a showman that's got to like always put on the best face and be chirpy, and like, that's exhausting. But equally, if you've got a showman that's like, I'm just going to quietly get on and hope everybody leaves me alone, feeling like you're being watched, it's hard work for all of the different showmans, whatever the strategy, to be functioning in this kind of environment. And there's nowhere to hide. You can't just slip into the corner of the room. There isn't a corner of the room in Zoom, because if you go over here, it just looks a bit odd, and people will, it's...
Yeah, you kind of draw attention to yourself even more, don't you, by trying to distance. So, if you turn your camera off, people really notice that you've turned your camera off, and they start you get little messages in the side saying, "Are you okay?" And it's really, and which is just as exhausting. So, with your drama therapy experience, with your other experiences that you bring to this table, what some of the tips if somebody's maybe in a place where they don't feel that they are as self-aware as they want to be because they're just exhausted by everything, is there anything you can recommend that they do or maybe stop doing that would help them?
I think say no to things if you don't want to go to them, if you can. Like, if it's an essential work meeting, you can't always, but having that, it's okay to say no. I'd say that's the main thing. Having time limits. So if this is a 3-hour meeting, do you need to sit here for the whole time? Is there a comfort break? If you can get up and stretch even, and just like take a minute, get a cup of tea, something that will break the need to just be here,
Sure.
staring at the camera, performing or doing whatever it is, but break it up somehow. Also, if you're leading these groups, to have some awareness of that, that this is it's not the same as everybody going out for a coffee or going to the pub or whatever they do socially. It's very different. So what could be done to make it feel more natural? Would breakout rooms help, or would they actually intensify it because you've then got less people looking and you need to do more? But what's the balance of these things? What do people really need?
Yeah, that's really helpful, because again, a common thread of what I'm hearing you say is just maybe making more intentional time to think about what's going on internally, and also to be much more open and have those conversations with people around you, recognizing that what you're feeling is a pressure, or what you're feeling is something that you're missing or mourning, might be the completely oppositely being received by them.
I think internal feelings are so big right now. I read something this week about usually about 7% of the population meet the criteria for clinical depression,
Yeah.
but we're currently up at about 33%. And in sort of self-analyzed questionnaires, how do you think your mental health is? Depending on which survey you look at, between 50 and 70% of people are currently reporting bad mental health or worse mental health. And it's really being aware of that if you feel like you're in this meeting and it's just draining, you are not the only one that feels that way.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's that really interesting double bind almost, because often what those kinds of feeling need is connection, but also what they reject is connection.
Yes.
And in this kind of superficial, not quite connecting way of connecting, it's very difficult to feel like somebody's alongside you if you're feeling those kind of things inside.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm both kind of shocked and not surprised by the figures that you're suggesting. I mean, it makes sense, and certainly I've had a number of conversations over the last few months with people who um, are either articulating very clearly that they're having some of those symptoms, or they're reflecting on a way that makes you wonder. And again, from a coaching perspective, I'm having lots of conversations with people where I'm saying, we're living in a global pandemic. There's trauma. It's all of this reaction that you feel is understandable. It's not necessarily just you being broken or something being broken inside you. There's loads of external things that would really, really play. What I've also found interesting is I've got a history of poor mental health myself. I've had depression and anxiety, and I'm talking to some people who are that's part of their history, but who are doing okay. And those of us in that category, what's been quite interesting is, I think, because we've had to put coping strategies in place, we've had to understand kind of flow of energy and enthusiasm and positivity and the opposites of that actually, I've got to frame it better than this probably, but in a weird way, it feels like we're maybe better equipped to deal with some of this external trauma, because it's an echo of some of the traumas that we've had to process already. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. And I've definitely seen that in some of the people that I've been talking to
Yeah.
this season. Um, I think it can go one of two ways, because I've seen people who have histories with mental ill health, and this has triggered a load. So there's re-emergences of addictions or eating disorders or other self-destructive behaviors. And I've seen people who have been through this and been working with it and found things that work, and are like, actually, I've been preparing for this.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. The story of Noah building an ark just came to my head of you've done this thing and you didn't necessarily know what you were doing, and suddenly all the floodwaters came and you're the boat that's now floating,
Yeah.
and everyone else is going, what's happening? But there's something there, I think, for some people, that
Yeah.
it's definitely been strategies that are ready to put in place for this kind of pandemic.
So there's an encouragement there for those of us who've deliberately or through necessity have created those strategies. But there's also, I mean, both of us would want anyone listening to who's not feeling that they're coping very well to acknowledge that is also understandable. There's help you can get, but it's understandable. There are reasons for this. So we're pretty much out of time, Amy. And one of the things I've been really keen,
Gosh.
I know it's great. One of the things I'm really keen to do in these 15 minutes is to make sure that we end up in a place, of hope and possibility. And I think, as in most of the interviews, we've kind of covered there. But is there anything else that you kind of want to say, that you want to leave us with, where we can see that that possibility of growth is still there?
Every bad day that we have had so far, if you're watching this, we've survived it. And whatever we've been going through, it's now easing, and hopefully that will continue. And we have learnt things on the way, and we are stronger than we thought we were. I think certainly for me, if you told me in December this was what the year would be like, I'd have been like, are you crazy?
Yeah.
And here we are, we made it through. So keep going. To succeed, you have to just get up one more time, then you fall down.
Yeah. Well, that's a brilliant place to end it, Amy. As I say, with all these interviews, there's so much more I'm thinking about. I'm going to go off and think about loads of stuff. But for now, Amy Wilshire, you've been a great guest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. It's been a pleasure talking to you.